"Why are you wasting water?" the alien girl yelled after seeing the human relieve himself. The scorching twin suns of Aquarius 7 beat down mercilessly as Christian Reynolds guided his battered Stellar-class freighter, the Desert Rose, toward a dilapidated landing pad on the outskirts of New Haven settlement. The ship's ancient hydraulics groaned in protest as he set her down, kicking up clouds of reddish dust that swirled in the hot wind. "Another perfect landing," he muttered to himself, running a hand through his light brown hair, sweat already beading on his forehead despite the environmental controls. He'd heard stories about this desert world where water was more precious than platinum, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of it. The ship's external sensors showed a brutal 48 degrees Celsius outside. Christian stripped off his flight jacket, leaving him in just a sleeveless compression shirt that showed off his muscular build, a physique earned through years of hauling cargo and the occasional necessity of fighting off pirates. "Computer, run full diagnostic and begin refueling procedures," he commanded, grabbing his canteen and gun belt. "And keep those defense systems online. I don't trust this place." "Acknowledged," the AI responded. "Warning, local atmospheric conditions indicate extreme water conservation measures are advised." Christian snorted. "Yeah, I got the memo. Just keep her ready for a quick exit if needed." He descended the boarding ramp, immediately hit by a wall of heat that made Earth's deserts feel like a spring day. The settlement sprawled before him, a hodgepodge of environmental domes and reinforced structures built to withstand the planet's frequent sandstorms. His contact had been clear: find a local guide, navigate the Crimson Wastes, retrieve the artifact, get paid. Simple job, right? The bar was exactly where he'd been told it would be, a squat, dome-top building with a faded sign reading, "The Last Drop." The irony wasn't lost on him. Inside, the temperature dropped to merely uncomfortable levels. The place was sparsely populated, mostly by beings adapted to desert environments. His eyes were drawn immediately to a striking figure at the bar, a humanoid female with light green skin and flowing white hair that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. As if sensing his gaze, she turned, revealing large turquoise eyes that fixed on him with unmistakable interest. Her black outfit, adorned with metallic accents, hugged curves that would be distracting on any world. "You must be the off-worlder," she said, her voice carrying a musical quality. "I'm Laga. I hear you need a guide." Christian leaned against the bar, maintaining eye contact. "That obvious, huh?" "Only humans would wear so much clothing in this heat," she replied with a slight smirk. "Though I see you're learning." He ordered a drink, something local and non-alcoholic. "I need to reach the Temple of the Ancients in the Crimson Wastes. I'm told you're the best guide in the region." "I am," she stated simply. "I'm also expensive." "Money's not an issue." He took a sip of his drink, immediately regretting it as the bitter taste hit his tongue. The client's paying well. Laga's eyes narrowed slightly. "The temple is forbidden ground. Many have died trying to reach it. Hence why I need the best." He met her gaze steadily. "You in?" She studied him for a long moment before nodding. "We leave at first light tomorrow. The journey takes 3 days if we're lucky." She stood, revealing herself to be nearly his height. "And Mr. Reynolds, pack light. Water is precious here." As she walked away, Christian couldn't help but notice the graceful way she moved. This job was either going to be very interesting or very dangerous, probably both. "One more thing," Laga called over her shoulder. "That weapon on your hip, energy-based?" Christian patted his blaster. "Latest Terran model. Why?" "Replace it with something kinetic. Energy weapons and sandstorms don't mix well here." She tossed him a knowing look. "Unless you enjoy the possibility of your gun exploding in your hand." Noted. He watched her disappear into the crowd, then turned back to his unfinished drink. The bartender, a burly 4-armed being with thick sand-coloured scales, was eyeing him suspiciously. "You're the third off-worlder this month, heading for the temple," the bartender growled. "Other two never came back." Christian shrugged. Maybe they didn't have the right guide. Or maybe the desert claimed them, like it claims all who disrespect it. The bartender leaned forward. "Word of advice, human. Whatever you're looking for, it's not worth dying of thirst for." "Thanks for the concern." Christian stood, leaving his drink mostly untouched. "But I'll take my chances." Outside, the suns were setting, painting the sky in shades of deep crimson and gold. The temperature had dropped slightly, making the air almost bearable. Christian headed back to his ship, mind already working on the preparations for tomorrow's journey. The Desert Rose's cargo hold was a mess of crates and equipment, most of which he'd need to leave behind. Laga was right. Travelling light was essential. He selected a compact kinetic pistol from his weapons locker, along with minimal survival gear and the specialized scanning equipment his client had provided. As he worked, the ship's computer chimed. External sensors detect approaching life form, humanoid female, matching earlier encountered biosignature. Christian looked up to see Laga approaching the ship. She moved with purpose, her expression serious. "Forgot to mention something?" he asked as Christian reached the bottom of the ramp. "Several things, actually," she said, crossing her arms. "First, we need to discuss payment. Second, there are rules you'll need to follow if you want to survive out there. And third," she glanced at his ship, "we'll need to take mine. Yours is too heavy for the deep desert. The sand would swallow it whole." Christian frowned. "My client was specific about maintaining control of the transport." "Your client obviously hasn't been to Aquarius 7. Laga's tone left no room for argument. "My skimmer is designed for these conditions. It's smaller, faster, and most importantly, won't sink into a sandpit at the first storm." He considered her words. The client had been clear, but they'd also emphasized completing the mission over following exact protocols. "Fine, but my gear comes with us." "Agreed, though I should warn you, the Temple's guardians don't take kindly to outsiders carrying unknown technology." Guardians? This was the first he'd heard of any inhabitants. "The intel said the place was abandoned centuries ago." Laga's lips curved in a slight smile. "There's a lot your intel got wrong. The desert keeps its secrets well." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and one more thing. Don't waste water out there. Every drop is sacred on this world. What counts as wasting? You'll learn." With that cryptic response, she disappeared into the gathering darkness, leaving Christian with more questions than answers. He spent the next few hours preparing, the warning about water conservation nagging at his mind. Earth's abundance of water had shaped human behaviour in ways he'd never considered before. Out here, those same behaviours might be seen very differently. As he worked, the desert wind picked up, carrying with it the whispered promises of adventure, danger, and discoveries that would change everything he thought he knew about this world and himself. The first rays of dawn painted the desert sky in hues of amber and rose as Christian loaded the last of his essential gear onto Laga's skimmer. The vessel was sleek and efficient, its silver hull designed to reflect the brutal heat of the twin suns. Despite its compact size, the craft's interior was surprisingly comfortable, with environmental controls that kept the temperature bearable. "Ready?" Laga asked, her turquoise eyes appraising both him and his gear. She had traded her black outfit for a lighter ensemble that still managed to accentuate her graceful form. The morning light played across her green skin, giving it an almost ethereal glow. Christian nodded, trying not to stare. Born ready. He'd stripped down to the basics, cargo pants and a light shirt that did little to conceal his muscular build. The desert heat made anything more substantial impractical. Laga's gaze lingered on his physique for a moment before she turned to the controls. We'll need to make a stop at the Shrine of Eternal Flow before entering the deep desert. It's tradition and necessity. The skimmer lifted smoothly, gliding just above the sand as they left New Haven behind. Christian watched the settlement shrink into the distance, noting how the morning light transformed the desert into a sea of golden waves. "Tell me about this shrine," he said, settling into the co-pilot seat. The proximity to Laga in the confined space was distracting. "It's one of our most sacred sites," she explained, her voice taking on a reverent tone. "A natural spring, protected by ancient technology. The water there is said to be blessed by the planet itself. All travellers must pay respects and receive the shrine's blessing before venturing into the deep desert." Christian raised an eyebrow. "Blessed sounds mystical for a natural spring." Laga's lips curved in an amused smile. "You'll see. Though I should warn you, our customs regarding water might seem strange to you. Because Earth has so much of it?" "Partly." She glanced at him, curiosity evident in her expression. "I still find it hard to believe. Oceans of water, rain falling freely from the sky. Sounds like paradise. Or Seattle," Christian quipped. Laga tilted her head. "Seattle? Earth City, famous for its constant rain, drove me crazy growing up there." "Crazy?" Laga's voice held a mix of disbelief and fascination. "Water falling from the sky whenever nature wills it. I can't imagine such abundance." Their conversation flowed easily as the skimmer glided across the desert. Christian found himself increasingly drawn to Laga's perspective on things he'd always taken for granted. Her intelligence and wit matched her physical beauty, and he caught himself watching the graceful movements of her hands on the controls more often than was strictly professional. After several hours, a structure appeared on the horizon, a towering spire of iridescent crystal that seemed to catch and amplify the sunlight. As they drew closer, Christian saw that it rose from a circular complex of ancient buildings, their surfaces covered in flowing scripts he didn't recognize. "The Shrine of Eternal Flow," Laga announced, bringing the skimmer down on a designated landing pad. "Remember, every drop of water here is sacred. Follow my lead and try not to offend anyone." The air outside was brutally hot, but a faint mist emanating from the crystal spire provided blessed relief. As they approached the shrine's entrance, Christian noticed other travellers, various humanoid species, all dressed in light, flowing garments. A group of robed figures emerged to greet them, their skin tones ranging from deep blue to pale green. They moved with a fluid grace that reminded Christian of flowing water. "Welcome, seekers," the lead figure said, their voice melodious. "You come to honor the sacred waters." Laga bowed deeply. "We do, Keeper. We seek blessing for our journey into the deep desert." The Keeper's gaze settled on Christian, studying him with ancient eyes. "An off-worlder from a water-rich world." A pause. "I sense this will be interesting." Christian followed Laga's example and bowed, though less gracefully. "I come with respect," he said, hoping it was the right thing to say. "Respect is good," the Keeper nodded, "but understanding is better. You must participate in the ritual of recognition before receiving our blessing." Laga shot Christian a quick glance that held both amusement and concern. "The full ritual?" "Of course." The Keeper's expression remained serene. How else can one truly understand the sacred nature of water? What followed was unlike anything Christian had experienced. They were led through crystalline corridors to a chamber where the walls seemed to flow with liquid light. The air was cool and moist, a stark contrast to the desert outside. The ritual began with meditation, focused on the sound of falling water. Then came the teachings, ancient wisdom about the precious nature of every drop, the cycle of life it represented. Christian found himself drawn into the ceremony despite his initial skepticism. The final phase involved a sacred sharing of water, a single, precious drop placed on the tongue, meant to forge a connection between participants. When Laga performed this part of the ritual with him, their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Her fingers brushed his lips as she administered the drop, and Christian felt his heart rate spike. "Water is life," she whispered, her face close to his. "It flows through all beings, connecting us." The intimacy of the moment was intense, charged with unspoken possibilities. Christian found himself hyper-aware of every detail, the subtle scent of her skin, the way her breath caught slightly when their hands touched, the depth of emotion in her turquoise eyes. After the ritual, they were led to private chambers to rest before continuing their journey. The rooms were cool and comfortable, with views of the desert beyond. Christian stood at his window, watching the sunset, when a soft knock came at his door. It was Laga, her white hair loose around her shoulders, her expression thoughtful. "The ritual affected you deeply," she said, entering his room. It wasn't a question. "It was intense," he admitted. "I've never experienced anything like it." She moved closer, her presence making the room feel suddenly smaller. "You begin to understand our reverence for water. It is precious, sacred, like the connections it creates between beings." The air between them crackled with tension. Christian found himself drawn toward her, unable and unwilling to resist the pull. "Laga." She placed a finger against his lips. "Some things don't need words." What followed was a night of discovery and connection, where cultural differences melted away in the face of more universal truths. Their coming together was as natural as water finding its level, a flow of energy and emotion that transcended their different worlds. Dawn found them wrapped in each other's arms, the desert wind singing outside their window. Christian traced patterns on Laga's green skin, marveling at how events had led to this moment. "We should get moving," Laga said eventually, though she made no move to leave his embrace. "The deep desert awaits." "Any more cultural surprises I should know about?" Christian asked, only half joking. Laga's laugh was like music. "Oh, you have no idea, but don't worry, I'll guide you through them all." As they prepared to leave the shrine, Christian noticed the keepers watching them with knowing smiles. The lead keeper approached as they were loading the skimmer. "You begin to understand," they said to Christian, "but the desert has many more lessons to teach. Keep your mind and heart open to them." Laga's hand found his as they lifted off, the crystal spire gleaming behind them. The deep desert stretched ahead, mysterious and challenging, but Christian felt ready for whatever it might bring. He had found something unexpected in this water-scarce world, a connection that ran deeper than any ocean on Earth. The deep desert stretched before them like an endless ocean of sand, its golden dunes rippling under the merciless twin suns. The skimmer glided smoothly over the terrain, its environmental system struggling against the increasing heat. Inside, Christian and Laga sat in comfortable silence, their newfound intimacy adding a pleasant undercurrent to the journey. "Temperature's rising," Laga noted, checking the instruments. "We'll need to stop soon. There's a sheltered canyon ahead where we can wait out the worst of the day's heat." Christian nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. Despite the skimmer's cooling systems, the heat was becoming unbearable. He'd already stripped off his shirt, earning appreciative glances from Laga that made the temperature seem even higher. "How do your people handle this heat?" he asked, watching her skillfully navigate between towering dunes. "Our bodies are adapted to it," she replied, her eyes briefly trailing over his exposed torso. "Though, I must admit, your human adaptations are intriguing." The playful tone in her voice made him grin. Their night at the shrine had opened new dimensions in their relationship, but the professional aspect of their journey remained paramount. Still, the way she looked at him. The skimmer descended into a narrow canyon, its walls providing blessed shade. Ancient rock formations created natural caverns, and Laga guided their vessel into one of these natural shelters. "We'll rest here until the worst of the heat passes," she announced, powering down the systems. "There's a natural water collection system in these caves, very sacred to my people." As they exited the skimmer, Christian felt the urgent call of nature. After hours of travel and several water rations, his body had its own priorities. He glanced around the cavern, noting the relative privacy offered by a cluster of rocks. "I'll be right back," he said, heading toward the rocks. "Just need a quick break." Laga was busy checking their supplies and merely nodded, not really paying attention. Christian found a suitable spot and, with the casual attitude of someone raised on a water-rich world, began to relieve himself. The sudden gasp behind him made him freeze. "By the sacred springs!" Laga's voice was filled with shock and something close to horror. "Why is water coming out of your body? Is your suit malfunctioning? Why are you wasting water on the ground?" Christian turned his head, mortified, to find Laga staring at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. He quickly finished and adjusted his clothing, his face burning with embarrassment. It's natural," he stammered, turning to face her. "Human bodies are mostly water. We need to process it regularly." Laga approached him, her expression a mixture of fascination and dismay. "You mean you regularly expel water from your body? Just release it to the ground?" "Well, yes," Christian explained, trying to maintain his composure. "On Earth, water is abundant. We have oceans, rivers, regular rainfall. Our bodies evolved to process and release excess water." "Liquid gold," Laga whispered, shaking her head in amazement. "You're literally releasing liquid gold onto the ground. Do you have any idea how precious that fluid would be to my people?" The implications of her words made Christian uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, I didn't think— Wait, what do your people do?" Laga launched into an explanation of her world's complex water recycling systems, describing technology and cultural practices that made every drop count. Christian listened with growing amazement, realizing just how deep the cultural differences between their worlds ran. "So, when you see me you must think I'm incredibly wasteful," he concluded. "Wasteful, yes, but also fascinating," Laga admitted, stepping closer. "Your body contains so much water, processes it so freely. It's almost miraculous to us. Our bodies are designed to conserve every drop." Their proximity was affecting him again, the air between them charged with something more than just cultural curiosity. Laga reached out, tracing a finger along his chest, collecting a bead of sweat. "Even this," she murmured, "would be collected and purified in our culture. But you produce it so easily, so naturally." The intimacy of the moment was interrupted by a distant roar that echoed through the canyon. Both of them tensed, instantly alert. "Sandworm," Laga said grimly. "They're drawn to moisture. We need to move deeper into the caves." They quickly gathered their essential supplies from the skimmer and retreated further into the cavern system. The temperature dropped as they went deeper, and the light from the entrance became a distant glow. "The worms rarely come this far in," Laga explained, activating a light source, "but they're not the only dangers in these caves." As if on cue, something skittered in the darkness beyond their light's reach. Christian instinctively moved closer to Laga, his hand finding hers. "What else lives down here?" "Cave crawlers mostly, dangerous but predictable. They're also drawn to moisture, which means—" She gave him a meaningful look. "You'll need to be more careful about your natural processes." Despite the tension of their situation, Christian couldn't help but laugh. "So, not only am I wasting precious resources, but I'm also attracting predators. Welcome to Aquarius 7. Laga smiled, squeezing his hand. "Where even your bodily functions can get you killed." They found a defensible position in a small chamber, setting up their emergency shelter. The close quarters forced them into intimate proximity, their bodies sharing warmth as the cave's temperature continued to drop. "Tell me more about Earth," Laga requested as they huddled together. "About your oceans and rivers. It sounds like a dream." Christian described the waterways of his homeworld, watching Laga's face fill with wonder at tales of rainfall and vast bodies of water. Her fascination with what he considered mundane made him see his own world through new eyes. "Your world sounds like paradise," she sighed, resting her head against his shoulder. "It has its own problems," he admitted. "But yes, we're blessed with abundance in some ways, though I'm starting to appreciate the value of scarcity." Laga lifted her head to look at him questioningly. "It makes you appreciate things more," he explained, running a finger along her jawline. "Makes every drop precious." Their lips met in a kiss that spoke of deeper understanding, of bridges being built between their different worlds. The dangers lurking in the darkness beyond their shelter were momentarily forgotten as they lost themselves in each other's embrace. A closer roar reminded them of their precarious situation. They broke apart, both breathing heavily. "We should rest while we can," Laga suggested, though her eyes suggested sleep wasn't what she had in mind. "The worm will move on eventually, and we'll need our strength for what lies ahead." As they settled in for a period of rest, Christian found himself reflecting on how quickly his perspective had changed. What had started as a simple guide-client relationship had evolved into something far more complex and meaningful. And somewhere in the darkness, ancient secrets awaited them, promising more discoveries and challenges ahead. The deeper chambers of the cave system held secrets older than civilization itself. Christian's light source illuminated vast walls covered in intricate paintings, their colours still vibrant despite the passage of millennia. He and Laga stood hand in hand, studying the ancient artwork with growing amazement. "This can't be right," Laga whispered, her turquoise eyes wide with disbelief. "These paintings, they show oceans, rivers, lakes. On Aquarius 7? Christian stepped closer to the wall, his free hand tracing the flowing lines of what appeared to be a massive body of water. "Not just water bodies," he observed. "Look at the vegetation, the cities. This planet was once a paradise." The paintings told a story that contradicted everything Laga had been taught about her world. Scene after scene depicted a thriving civilization surrounded by abundant water resources. But as they moved along the wall, the images changed dramatically. There, Christian pointed to a series of darker images. Some kind of catastrophe. Artificial by the look of it. The painting showed massive machines drawing water from the surface, storing it deep underground. The next scenes depicted the gradual transformation of the planet into the desert world it was today. "This wasn't natural." Laga's voice trembled with emotion. "Someone did this to our world. But why?" Before Christian could respond, a distant rumble reminded them of the sandworm's presence. They moved deeper into the chamber, finding a small alcove that offered both protection and privacy. The close quarters brought them into intimate contact, their bodies pressed together in the confined space. "Your people didn't just adapt to water scarcity," Christian said softly, his breath warm against Laga's ear. "They were forced to adapt. The question is, by whom?" Laga turned in his arms, her face inches from his. "The temple," she said. "The artifact you're seeking, could it be connected to this?" "My client wasn't exactly forthcoming about details," Christian admitted, "but this can't be coincidence. A desert world with hidden water, ancient technology, and a mysterious temple." Their conversation paused as they became acutely aware of their proximity. The revelations about her world's history had created an emotional intensity that amplified their physical attraction. Laga's hands traced the contours of Christian's chest, collecting the moisture that gathered there. "You're like a walking water source," she murmured, her touch sending shivers through him despite the heat. "Every part of you produces it so freely. It's fascinating and incredibly attractive." Christian smiled, running his fingers through her silken white hair. "I'm starting to think everything about me is attractive to your people." "Not everything," she corrected, pressing closer. "Just you." Their passion ignited again, more intense than before. The ancient chamber became their private sanctuary as they explored their connection, their different physiologies creating unique sensations and discoveries. Their joining was both physical and spiritual, a bridge between their worlds. Afterward, they lay together on their emergency blankets, studying the cave paintings in the dim light. Christian traced lazy patterns on Laga's green skin, marvelling at how their differences only made their connection stronger. "These paintings change." "Everything," Laga said eventually. "If our world was artificially turned into a desert, if our water was stolen rather than naturally scarce, then—" "Your entire culture is based on a lie," Christian finished gently. "No." She shook her head. "Our reverence for water isn't wrong just because it was forced upon us, but knowing this, it changes the meaning of my mission." Christian propped himself up on an elbow. "Your mission? I thought you were just my guide." Laga gave him a complicated smile. "Just as you haven't been entirely honest about your client, I haven't been entirely honest about my role. I'm not just a guide. I'm a priestess of the water temples. I was sent to watch you, to make sure you didn't defile our sacred sites." Instead of anger, Christian felt admiration for her cunning. "And now I think we're both part of something bigger than ourselves." She sat up, her expression serious. "The temple you're seeking, it's not just a religious site. It's connected to whatever happened to our world, and I think—" She hesitated. "I think that's why they sent me with you. The high priest must know something about this." A distant roar, closer than before, interrupted their discussion. They quickly dressed and gathered their supplies, aware that their sanctuary wouldn't remain safe for long. "We need to move," Laga said, checking their water supplies. "The worm is getting closer, and we still have a long journey ahead." As they prepared to leave, Christian took one last look at the cave paintings. "Your people deserve to know the truth about their world." "Truth is like water," Laga replied, taking his hand. "Too much, too fast, can drown you. We need to understand more before we decide what to do with this knowledge." They made their way through the cave system, following Laga's instincts and Christian's tactical training to avoid the predators. Their shared secrets and intimacy had created a deeper trust between them, making them move as one through the darkness. "Once we reach the temple," Christian said as they approached the cave's exit, "everything might change. Are you prepared for that?" Laga's response was to pull him into a passionate kiss. "I'm prepared for anything," she whispered against his lips, "as long as we face it together." The twin suns had set when they emerged from the caves, painting the desert in shades of purple and gold. Their skimmer was untouched, protected by the natural hangar of the cave entrance. As they prepared for the next leg of their journey, both knew that their mission had evolved into something far more significant than either had initially imagined. The truth about Aquarius 7's past, combined with their growing feelings for each other, had set them on a path that could change not just their lives, but the entire planet. The Temple of the Ancients rose from the desert like a mirage, its crystalline spires catching the light of the twin suns and fracturing it into rainbow patterns across the sand. Christian and Laga stood at the crest of a dune, their skimmer powered down behind them, taking in the magnificent sight. "It's beautiful," Christian breathed, his hand finding Laga's. "Different from what I expected." The outer structure is merely a shell, Laga explained, her turquoise eyes reflecting the temple's shimmer. The real mysteries lie beneath. Though, I never imagined they might be what we discovered in those cave paintings. They approached cautiously, aware that they were crossing a threshold, both physical and metaphorical. The temple's entrance was a massive archway carved with symbols similar to those they'd seen in the caves. Laga traced them with her fingers, her expression thoughtful. "These aren't religious texts," she said softly. "They're technical specifications. All this time, we've been worshipping an environmental control center." Christian studied the markings, noting their systematic arrangement. "Your ancestors must have known. They turned technology into religion, to preserve knowledge through the generations." Inside, the temple was cool and dim, with pathways that spiraled downward into the planet's depths. Their footsteps echoed off crystal walls that seemed to pulse with internal light. The air grew notably more humid as they descended. "Feel that?" Laga asked, her skin taking on a slight luminescence in response to the moisture. "There's water here, more than I've ever sensed in one place." They followed the humidity gradient deeper into the complex, eventually reaching a vast chamber that took their breath away. Massive columns of water contained within crystalline tubes stretched from floor to ceiling. Ancient machinery hummed with power, maintaining whatever process had been running for millennia. "This is it," Christian said, approaching a central control panel. "This is what my client sent me to find. The planet's water isn't gone. It's being stored here, processed through these systems." Laga moved to join him but suddenly stopped, her expression alarmed. "Christian, wait." Too late. He had already placed his hand on the control surface. The entire chamber came alive with light, and a holographic interface materialized before them. A voice spoke in an ancient language that Laga somehow understood. "System access granted. Genetic profile, Earth human. Compatible with original parameters, awaiting instruction for planetary restoration sequence." Christian looked at Laga in surprise. "It recognizes Earth humans? How is that possible?" "Because," Laga said slowly, reading the data streaming across the holographic display, "your people were here before. Earth was involved in creating this system." The revelation hung between them as more information poured forth. The story of Aquarius 7's transformation was laid bare. An ancient experiment in planetary engineering, designed to create a civilization that would value and preserve water at all costs. The price had been the planet's surface water, stored in vast underground reservoirs like the one they stood in. "We can reverse it," Christian realized, studying the controls. "Return the water. Transform the planet back to what it was. Your people could have oceans again, rivers, rain. And destroy everything we've become in the process," Laga finished quietly. Christian turned to her, seeing the conflict in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "Our entire civilization is built around water conservation. Our technology, our culture, our relationships, everything is shaped by it." She stepped closer to him, placing her hand over his on the control panel. "If we restore the planet's water, we lose who we are." "But you'd gain so much more," Christian argued gently. "Your people wouldn't have to struggle just to survive." "Would we still value each drop as we do now? Would we maintain our deep connection to water, to each other?" Laga's free hand traced the moisture on his chest, a gesture that had become deeply meaningful between them. Would what we have still be possible in a world where water isn't precious? The question struck Christian silent. Their relationship had blossomed precisely because of their differences, because of the wonder they found in each other's relationship with water. In a transformed Aquarius 7, would Laga still look at him with that mixture of fascination and desire? Would their cultural differences still create that exciting tension that had drawn them together? "There has to be a middle ground," he said finally, "a way to restore some of the water without losing what makes your civilization unique." Laga's expression softened as she moved into his arms. "Perhaps that's why the system recognized you. Earth humans understand both scarcity and abundance. You can help us find that balance." Their lips met in a kiss that tasted of possibility and promise. The chamber's humid air made their skin slick with moisture, a sensation that still thrilled Laga and reminded Christian of how far they'd come in understanding each other's worlds. As they explored the ancient facility, they discovered that the system was designed to be adjusted gradually. They could restore water to the planet in stages, allowing the civilization to adapt slowly to each change. "It would take years," Christian said, reviewing the data, "generations even. But your people could guide the transformation, preserve what's important while embracing change." "And you?" Laga asked, her voice vulnerable. "Would you stay? Help us find that balance?" Christian pulled her close, breathing in her unique scent. "My client's mission was to find this place, understand its purpose. Nothing was said about what to do after." Their bodies came together naturally, passion ignited by the magnitude of their discovery and the choices before them. The chamber's crystal walls reflected their joining, creating patterns of light and shadow that seemed to celebrate their union. Later, as they lay together on their emergency blankets, Christian traced the luminescent patterns that appeared on Laga's skin in response to the chamber's humidity. "We should head back," he said reluctantly. "Report what we found to your client?" Laga asked, propping herself up on an elbow. "Or to my people?" "Both. They need to work together on this. Earth's experience with water management, combined with your people's conservation wisdom, it could create something entirely new." Laga smiled, the expression full of hope and mischief. "Speaking of water management," she glanced meaningfully at him, "we should probably discuss more efficient ways to handle your biological needs before we return to civilization." Christian laughed, pulling her down for another kiss. "I thought you'd never ask." The ancient machinery hummed to life as Christian initiated the smallest possible water release sequence. According to their calculations, this minimal adjustment would create a controlled test of the system's capabilities. Laga stood beside him, her hand intertwined with his, both of them watching the holographic displays with anticipation. "Everything looks stable," Christian said, monitoring the readings. "The first micro-reservoir should be releasing now." A low rumble echoed through the temple's chambers, and the crystalline tubes pulsed with increased activity. Laga's skin began to glow more intensely in response to the rising humidity. "Christian," she whispered, her turquoise eyes wide, "something's wrong. The water pressure, it's too high." Before he could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. The holographic displays flashed with warning symbols, and the ancient voice spoke rapidly in its long-dead language. "The system's releasing too much," Christian shouted over the noise, his fingers flying over the controls. "The safety protocols are failing." "The reservoirs are all connected," Laga realized, reading the data streams. "Releasing one has triggered a cascade effect. The entire storage network is becoming unstable." They worked frantically to contain the release, but the ancient machinery had its own agenda. Centuries of containment had created pressures they hadn't anticipated, and now those pressures were threatening to tear the planet apart. "If all the reservoirs release at once," Christian said grimly, "the sudden return of water won't create oceans. It'll create chaos, flash floods, massive sinkholes. The entire desert ecosystem will collapse." Laga pressed herself against him, her body trembling with both fear and excitement. "There must be an emergency protocol. The ancients wouldn't have built this without a failsafe." Christian pulled her into a quick, fierce kiss before turning back to the controls. Help me search the database. Look for anything about system purging or emergency venting." They worked as one, their minds and bodies in perfect sync as they raced against time. The rumbling grew stronger, and they could hear the crystal tube straining against the increasing pressure. "There," Laga pointed to a sequence of symbols. "These match the emergency glyphs in the water temples. They're talking about pressure distribution through the sacred sites." Christian quickly scanned the information. The temples, they're not just religious sites, they're pressure release valves. If we can activate them in sequence, we can channel the water safely. "To the surface," Laga finished, already inputting commands. "But someone needs to go to the main temple and activate the master control manually. The automated systems are too degraded." Their eyes met, understanding passing between them. "I'll go," they said simultaneously, then couldn't help but laugh despite the crisis. "We both go," Christian decided, grabbing their essential gear. Together, they raced through the trembling facility, the air growing thicker with moisture as more systems began to fail. Water droplets formed on the crystal walls, running down in rivulets that made Laga's skin shimmer with responsive bioluminescence. "You're glowing like a star," Christian observed as they ran, unable to keep the admiration from his voice even in their dire situation. "Focus on running, water-bearer," she teased back, though her eyes sparkled at the compliment. "We can appreciate each other's unique features after we save the planet." They reached the central chamber where they had first entered the temple. The master control panel was located beneath the main altar, hidden in plain sight for centuries, its true purpose disguised as religious iconography. As Christian worked to access the controls, Laga kept watch on the environmental readings. "The pressure is still building. Whatever we're going to do, it needs to be soon." "Got it," Christian announced as the altar slid aside, revealing an ancient but well-preserved control system. "But there's a problem. The activation sequence requires constant pressure from both a water-rich and a water-conservative physiology. The ancients built it this way deliberately. The planet can only be changed through cooperation." Laga moved to his side, understanding immediately. "Like us, we need to do this together." They positioned themselves at the control panel, their bodies pressing close in the confined space. The physical intimacy of their position, combined with the intensity of the moment, created an electric atmosphere despite the crisis. "Ready?" Christian asked, his hand poised above the controls. "With you, always," Laga replied, placing her hand beside his. They initiated the sequence together, their physiologies working in perfect harmony. The temple responded immediately, ancient machinery awakening fully for the first time in millennia. The pressure began to distribute through the network of temples across the planet, releasing water in a controlled pattern that would transform the desert gradually rather than catastrophically. As the crisis subsided, they remained entwined, watching the holographic displays show the successful dispersal of water across Aquarius 7. Small oases began forming at each temple site, creating patches of fertile ground that would slowly expand over generations. "It's beautiful," Laga breathed, watching her world begin its careful transformation. A perfect balance between preservation and progress. Christian turned to her, struck by how the flowing light patterns in the chamber played across her green skin. "Like us," he said softly, "different worlds finding harmony together." Their lips met in a passionate kiss, celebrating both their survival and their success. The chamber's increasing humidity made their skin slick with moisture, a sensation that had come to represent their unique connection. "You know," Laga said later, as they lay together on their emergency blankets, watching the holographic displays show the continuing controlled release of water. "This all started because you needed a biological break." Christian laughed, pulling her closer. Are you still going to yell at me about wasting water? No, she smiled, tracing patterns on his chest. But I am going to insist you use the proper recycling facilities from now on. As your guide to this world, it's my duty to teach you proper water conservation. And as a human from a water-rich world, it's my duty to show you that some resources are meant to be shared freely, he countered, capturing her hand and bringing it to his lips. Speaking of sharing, Laga's eyes sparkled with mischief as she moved to straddle him. I believe we have some celebrating to do. Their laughter echoed through the ancient chamber as they came together once more, their bodies speaking a language that transcended their different worlds. 1 year later, the New Haven settlement had transformed. Small gardens bloomed around the water temple, fed by the carefully controlled release of ancient reservoirs. Christian stood at the window of their home, watching children play in a recently constructed fountain, a sight that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Laga joined him, her pregnant belly just beginning to show. Their child would be the first of a new generation, born into a world that was finding balance between water conservation and celebration. Still no regrets? She asked, leaning back against his chest. About staying. Never. He placed his hands on her belly, feeling the life they'd created together. Though I do miss the look of shock on your face when you first saw me wasting water. I was not shocked, she protested, laughing. I was culturally concerned. Is that what we're calling it now? Their playful banter was interrupted by a ping from Christian's communicator, another message from his former client, no doubt still trying to negotiate access to the temple's technology. They had made it clear that the transformation of Aquarius 7 would happen on its own terms, guided by the combined wisdom of both their peoples. You know, Laga said thoughtfully, our child will probably have your water-rich physiology. Poor you, Christian grinned, a lifetime of explaining why your half-human offspring is wasting water. Perhaps, she smiled, turning in his arms, but think of the stories we'll have to tell them, about how their parents met and fell in love, because of a biological necessity. As they kissed, the twin suns set outside their window, painting the slowly transforming desert in shades of gold and promise. Their story had begun with a cultural misunderstanding about water, but it had grown into something far more profound, a testament to how differences could become strengths and how love could bridge the gap between worlds,